This video is Mike Clarkson's presentation at the AHA meeting on aquatic snakes. I missed part of the presentation, but if you want it all next time, come to the meeting. Dave introduced Mike, and then Mike began his presentation. Unfortunately, I didn't start the video immediately, so you missed the first little bit.
I'm going to let him go back to his muddy ways. All right, buddy. Okay, so that was a series I did for Zillow where I basically went and found the commonly kept reptiles, and this was kind of like a side plot because I had to include that because that's my thing, and showed people the natural habitat and then kind of extrapolate some care notes, and hoping to inspire people to give them inspiration for their enclosures, especially if you're doing something a little bigger. I always love when someone's building a huge tank, you're like, what's that for? A ball python? That's actually really cool because you're going out of your way to do more and more. So that's what that was. But I figured it'd just be a fun introduction to what we're talking about today, which is Homolopsidae and Aquacordidae. So Homolopsidae is the mud snake family. They're all Southeast Asian. They're also mostly rear-fanged, most of the family, but very mildly so. None of them have ever had documented cases of any human effects, but obviously anything rear-fanged, don't let it bite you all the time. And then Aquacordidae, most people know the elephant trunk snake. In that family, there's also two other species. There's the marine file snake, which is right here. That was on Komodo Island, and it literally just crawled up to me like that. The elephant trunk snake, and then the fruitophile snake. But that's a very ancient lineage of snakes, so we'll talk about those as well. We're not talking about your semi-aquatic snakes, your garter snakes, or your Okay, so let's start. We're going to start from the easiest ones to keep, and where I suggest most people start, and then work the way down to the hardest. The reason I do this is everyone's like, I really want a tentacled snake. I'm like, what other aquatic snakes have you had? None. Nope. No, don't just start there. Let's kind of work our way up. So we're going to start with the easy ones, the ones that I'd say are pretty fail-safe. Okay, so this is Homolopsis, as you saw in the video. Homolopsis buctata. There's a few species, but buctata is the one we see most commonly in the pet trade. They're imported from Indonesia. That's why we get those. The other species are in Vietnam and throughout Southeast Asia. The cool thing about these is they come in a lot of pattern morphs and color variants. Now, I apologize. This photo is from 99, and I did not know that gravel was a horrible substrate at that time, so just ignore that ugly photo. But it's to show some pattern. This one obviously is mixing the black, aberrant, leucistic, and there's a few different forms of albino. And this year I'll actually find out if those are compatible because you have a few different looking albinos, and no one's tried to breed it out. So we'll see if the different albinos are compatible, and it's just a variant of the animal itself or what's going on there. There's a leucistic. And they almost have a blue eyeliner. Another albino baby. And that's the other albino form. So you get one that's predominantly white, one that's predominantly yellow. Could be a T positive, T negative thing, but there's also a few other variants. So what's going on there, we'll have to prove it out genetically. That's another example of a very strange looking albino, really beautiful animal. And then this is mating. So to breed these guys, pretty much keep them alive. And then come this time of year, toss them together, and they will mate. As long as you're not feeding them excessive goldfish, you should get live young sometime in the late spring. They will also breed throughout the year, and I will say one note that if you decide, hey, I want to breed puff-faced water snakes, great one to try. They're durable. They can eat some goldfish, but the males will breed themselves to the point of losing body condition. So you have to really watch that. Most of the aquatic snakes do great cohabitating, meaning having multiple animals in one enclosure. In fact, in the wild, that's almost always how you find them. Like that video I just showed you, probably found 40 puff-faced water snakes and 24 of the anhydrous in an hour. It tends to be, you don't see them, and then when you see them, there's tons of them. There could be some strategy to this, because when you feed them, the fish will try to escape one snake and run right into another. If you have one snake in the tank, their feed success actually dramatically drops. So especially with things like tentacled snakes, housing them together is important because it helps them feed, but you also have to make sure that during breeding season, your males aren't just wearing themselves out. So this is what a basic Homolopsis setup looks like. To be perfectly honest, this portion of the tank is not necessary. As I started, these are fully aquatic snakes. However, this is a tool, and it's twofold. One, pothos. If they're growing, they're extracting nitrate. You won't have to change the water as often. In these snakes, what's most important is stability. So water changes are actually problematic if you're having to do them too consistent because your water chemistry is changing, your pH, your nitrates. think of it like coral. It doesn't like rapid changes. This allows you to kind of leave it alone a little bit more, having plants growing, as long as you're cutting them in their growth form. The other reason I like to leave top areas in my tanks is because the snake will crawl out of the water when something's wrong. An aquatic snake out of the water is an unhealthy snake. If you don't give them a place where they can, you won't know. So I like to leave these landings, even though they don't use them, so that if the snake's out of the water, I know something's up. Now there are exceptions. Acrocords don't use it, and tentacle snakes don't really tend to use it. But the rest of your aquatic snakes, giving them that landing option, they can kind of communicate to you, something's up, I'm not in the water. And anytime someone sends me a photo going, is this normal? Like, it's not. You need to evaluate everything, your temperature, your pH, your chemistry. So that's kind of a basic explanation of a basic Homelopsis tank. And you can do like a 40 to 65 gallon aquarium. This is running on a Fluval FX6 turned down a little bit. I prefer sumps, but having a lot of media and being able to slow down the flow is really important. This is another enclosure example. There's just simple 40. There's just one leucistic that lives in here. This aquarium's horrible, and actually I need to replace this photo. But again, a similar setup. There's logs sitting above, so they have an area to come out if they want, and then the pothos just for that nitrate extraction. Oh. Another example, a little more plants, same sort of thing. I am using sand here now. I do like to use sand on them. It's a lot of surface for beneficial bacteria, but I've also been playing around with things like Fluval stratum and UNS contrasoil because it provides a little bit of pH stability. And the next phase I'm going to start going into is trying to mix the mud a little closer to their natural mud. Do they need it? Obviously not. I've been breeding most of these species over a decade without it, but I'm always trying to find ways to enhance the care and elevate it to more that natural standard. Does anyone know Dr. Zach Lothman? Guys, he's done some incredible work, field observations, applying it to captive care, and seeing the natural behaviors coming out in captivity. That kind of stuff not only enhances the animal success, but getting natural behaviors and seeing that. And the thing I love about aquatic snakes, because this is the question I get most, is why aquatic snakes? Well, it's really simple. If you have a terrestrial snake, you're feeding it the food, and it's eating it, and there's not that much observation time necessarily. I feel like there's a few different types of keepers. You're either working towards your supermorph and you're kind of doing that ball python trait chasing where you're smashing genes together and hoping to prove that out. Then there's other people that just like trying really rare things, and there's other people that kind of like pioneering and the learning process. I'd say I'm probably halfway between those last two. I enjoy observing the animals. There's so much we don't know about them. These are mud snakes. They don't live in clear water. So I've got a stack of observations on elephant trunk snakes in my aquarium that when I'm speaking to people that are writing the papers that I'm basing my care off, they're like, that's not published science. And I'll give you a few examples later. So for me, why? They're naturally preying, they're naturally feeding. Their food's always in there with them. There's no feed time. I'm not doing anything other than keeping the water chemistry and the rest of the time observing them hunting, interacting, courting, all as if I wasn't a part of the equation. And for me, I really enjoy that because you get to see, who here knew, and if anyone raises their hand, I need to know how they do that. Elephant trunk snakes will ambush prey if they're female and caught a lure. Males don't. Yeah, we knew males were more searching and females were more sedentary. We didn't know that caudal lured. And that's the kind of observations you got to make keeping aquatic snakes. Are they easy? No. Are they affordable? No. But they are fun. Oh yeah, affordability. Fish are not cheap for feeders. Okay, so this is Homelopsis Merrill J. coxi. This is in Cambodia's Tonle Sap. And I just like throwing field herping photos in because I love field herping. This is a Merrill J. coxi that was recently sent to me. I just left Vietnam, the same pond I was at the next night they caught this. It doesn't do me any good. I don't import, but I was like, I wish I was there to see that because that thing's face is just amazing. And when you look at the regular phase, that last photo, you're like, well, it looks like the same snake you just showed us. It's a different species, but in albino, those things are wild. The reason I bring this up is those might be coming to the States, and if they do, that'll be a cool one to add to the breeding. But unfortunately, this is how they often come in. If you see an animal like this, don't purchase it. There's a lot of fungal pathogens, and the one these are most prone to is a pain in the butt to say. It's Prasinazinophis. There's like a double Z. I'm not going to try to say it twice. I can text you the word. It's like a paragraph. You win Scrabble instantly, but there's not enough Z cubes. But they'll often come in looking like this. Unfortunately, these animals were imported and then sent to me going, hey, I got these sick animals. Can you do anything about it? And unfortunately, at this point, there's some miracles, but very little because you have exposed blood. Bacteria's already entered the body, the bloodstream. You can see right there. Already lost a lot of body condition. Unfortunately, these animals had to be put down. And that's one of the biggest troubles with Homelopsis. If you get them looking good, they tend to establish well. But the cold in transportation often causes very rapid fungal outbreaks in a matter of days. That's okay. So there's another species that I am breeding, and I have the only ones in the States. So hopefully, eventually, I'll be able to talk some people down in some groups so that it's not just me, because if my power wherever it go down, my house burnt down, there wouldn't be anyone in the States. So talk to me if you want to get into this. And this is the black-bellied mud snake. So this is the first documented captive breeding of this species. And it's kind of a dog pile. I'm not entirely sure if this is normal for them, but so far every time I found them courting, it's multiple animals, which is interesting because the Homolospis punctata, which are very closely related and not that different, do not have the same behavior. So another interesting observation that we'll have to see if this is just something happening in this situation or happens all the time. Also, terrifying. When they're mating, they have to come up for air, and every now and then you'll have one struggling trying to come up for air, and as a keeper, it's really hard not to just want to intervene. Like, I'll tell you. Two snakes I hate when they copulate. These guys and Mahalia. Are anyone familiar with African file snakes? Okay, so the African file snakes, they're on Lima formosa, they were Gonian tophus, they've changed a few times. Those are the worst too, because they'll copulate for like 2 days, but they're snake eaters. And they're like snake eaters, not king snakes where they might. And I've lost one animal that way, because I'm like sitting there trying to like sleep next to the tank. You don't want to separate them, you'll injure them. Very, very thin, fragile hemipenes. So you just got to let them finish their thing, but they also want to eat each other as soon as they're done. So I'd say my two least favorites are that and then these guys, because I just think they're going to drown each other every time, and I just end up sitting in a chair for like 5 hours watching them.
How shallow is that tank?
This tank, actually, I have a photo of this tank coming up. Okay, so for the young ones, I actually like to raise in super shallow tanks. This is actually just a Herpetolgical enclosure. It's got about that much paludarium space. That's plenty. For most of these snakes, you don't want the water to be deeper than half the body weight. And they actually do better in shallow water. So if you notice that first clip I showed you, it's shallow water. Most of them I have found is in shallow water. So while they can go in deep water, it doesn't seem like they're spending most of their time there. They kind of like those shallows. So when I'm raising babies, it's just Herpetolgical and a sponge filter. Now you might be like, sponge filter, how's that enough? There's a lot of pothos and I'm chopping that out every day. There's a lot of light, I'm constantly making the pothos grow, so it's pulling out the nitrate, it's doing most of the work for me. But this is a very simple setup that works very well. Also, you see the duckweed. I actually hate duckweed, but like pothos, it extracts nitrate and it grows really fast, so it's a great way for that water to stay stable, and you can feed it to other fish. So I also kind of use it as a fish feed. So this is that last slide we just saw. So the animals are right here in that slide. I would say if I had to do it over again, I'd probably just get rid of the deep area. But I wanted to see, having no one's worked with these animals before, what's their preference? Where are they going to actually hang out? And that's usually what I'll do is I'll build a tank, I'll see which areas they're utilizing, not utilizing. Next tank rebuild, vary. Instead of cleaning the sand beds, I usually just tear down and redo every 3 years. You don't have to do that. It's just, it's a lot easier. Also, if you're going to get into aquatic snakes, keep one fish tank and keep it running. That way your media isn't affected by any snake pathogens, and when you want to start a new tank, you don't have to do that slow month-long cycle. I literally just pull the stuff from one, put it in the other, half and half the water, and then you're quick cycle within like a day. So it also allows you, if you need to break animals up, just having that kind of quarantined, clean fish tank that doesn't have any snake pathogens. You don't want to move anything from tank to tank, because again, the number one pathogen these animals have is fungal. Fungal spreads through spores. So every drop of that water, if there's fungus, it might as well be contaminated. Very important to note when we get to elephant trunk snakes, because they carry Ophidiomyces, SFD, contagious to all snakes. You have to treat every drop of water like it's contaminated. I don't sell these things very well. Okay, another personal favorite is rice paddock snakes. I just went to Vietnam hoping to find Hypsicopsis murphyi, who's named after the lead editor of the Aquatic Snakes book, and my friend John Murphy, named by Justin Bernstein, who's also a good friend. Justin found it in museum specimens. I'm not sure if either have actually got a photograph of it, so I was like, I'm going to get a photograph for them. Unfortunately, I saw it, I was exhausted, my luggage had arose, and I slipped and fell when I tried to grab it, and it got away. So I've yet to see that, get photos of a wild one, but that's a Hypsicopsis, rice paddock snake, and a couple really cool things about these. This is one of the most terrestrial aquatic snakes. This one breaks my rule, does not leave the water. At night, they like to go up in the trees in big piles, and they just kind of dogpile on top of each other. So that's kind of fun. There's a baby. Because that's what their enclosures get to look like. You get a nice deep Herpetolgical. During the day, there's nothing in these trees. Now, you probably could cohabit amphibian or something, but they might become food, so I've just avoided that altogether. However, some of your fish-eating vine snakes increase the success in some aquatic snakes, which we'll get to in a bit. So anyways, really simple setup. I think this was actually running a U3, which is now onto sponge filter rock, like varied levels. They pretty much hang out in the rocks, but at night they use that area. What's great about that they're not very prone to fungal pathogens because these fungi don't like being dried out. So rice paddy snakes are probably the most diehard. And because they live in areas like rice paddies where the water rises and falls, they're opportunistic carrion feeders. Meaning these things will eat frozen thawed fish. Meaning I don't pay to feed these snakes. Every time I have to go to my local fish store and pick up fish, they bag up the dead fish, I stick them in the freezer, and I defrost. I always freeze them just in case of parasites because the fish died on its own, so who knows what's going on. Freeze the fish, give it a couple weeks, thaw it out. This is like the one snake I could think you could keep for almost free other than water. Because they always have good fish. At least my local store does. Okay, now the babies. That was the adult tank. The babies are really small, and again, they don't like deep water, so I do a bog setup for them. This is a super simple, what they call a low-tech tank, where it's literally capped potting soil with an air bubbler and plants. There's nothing else going on here. And in fact, when I switched to this ridiculously simple setup, better success rate than anything I've tried so far. It is just muck. But again, these animals are curling muck. These are mud snakes, so this is a closer representation of what they live in than all the other fancy stuff I put in all the other tanks. Could it work for adults? I haven't tried. But for babies, this is working phenomenally well. And yeah, that is a souvenir from their native range. Okay, next. These guys used to be really popular in the 90s, and well, for an aquatic snake, and have kind of disappeared because they got a reputation of being really hard to keep. The thing is, puff-faced water snakes do eat some carp. So feeding them goldfish or minnows, which are in the carp family, won't kill them right away. These guys don't naturally eat Sopranidae. Goldfish kill them in a matter of months, just like a lot of garter snakes. So I think a lot of the impression of these guys being difficult to take care of was simply because people were feeding them goldfish. I will say right now that when people ask to buy a snake from me, which is pretty rare because I usually don't offer them directly on any platforms, it's more we talk, you're into it, I want you to have them. But a lot of people just have goldfish an option, and they don't realize that rosy reds aren't that much better. One of my side projects right now is try to commercialize molly fish into feeder fish for the same price as goldfish, because that's such a problem. But I really think the only reason people thought rainbow water snakes were difficult to keep was because they can't eat carp, because otherwise they're not that hard to keep. Pretty much the same as your puff-faced water snakes, a little shallower. But I'll show you a closure real fast. That's one in Vietnam. That's what. This is the last two were Anhydrus anhydrus. This is Anhydrus subtaneatus, or the Mekong mud snake. Recently separated and really hard to tell apart. It's a stripe and step checker, but another similar species. So this is what that enclosure looks like, and another pretty simple tank. This is just manzanita. The seeds are off Amazon. They actually work really well for like $3. Fluvial contra soil, and there's a bunch of plants up top, which you'll see in the next slide. So I actually have this tank up high, so you're actually looking down under the roots, which is kind of what I like about it. It's because I kind of get a under advantage. And you might be wondering what these are growing on, and I'll show you in the next slide. But this is, again, these plants, I'm constantly yanking them and replanting them just for the nitrate extraction. So here's how you build that tank. It's just a piece of egg crate, siliconed in, a couple egg crate supports, pond foam, and some substrate on top of that. It's not taking up much of the aquarium space, but it's allowing that shelf, which allows me to have a planting area for those plants, and also gives them that haul out area in case they want to let me know something's the matter. Okay, alternatively, you can do this. Now there's the vine snake, often comes in as Otula prasina or Otula niterizans, looks like Otula rufioscularia. Vine snakes. They're little red eye guys. Have you ever seen the ones that just come in as Asian vine snake and it's red eyes? Those aren't any of those, by the way. Those are clearly an undescribed species, and something that I've been saying for far too long, which was dumb because now that I'm actually working on it, I'm sure there's like 5 people working on the exact same thing. But they're fish-eating vine snake. There's really 3 fish-eating vine snakes. The true rufioscularia, which are Vietnamese endemic, and rarely come in because of that. Otula frenicinta, which are Burmese endemic, and I think I have the only breeding group outside of a zoo. And then these guys, which are Niterizans affinis or Rufa affinis, depending on where you fall in that kind of argument of what they really are. But in any case, this is a cohabitation that works really, really, really well. I was finding my fish-eating vine snakes were struggling to get the fish because the fish were going into the log. And the fish got smart, and the fish wisened up. And somehow the fish told their friends, because I had more fish, and they're like, yeah, no, hide under here, the snakes can't get us. And it was kind of becoming a problem, so I added some jerk crabs in there. You know, the mangrove red racer crabs. I love using crabs as cleanup crews, but racer crabs are jerks. You see them as red claw crabs or mangrove crabs. They pinch snakes. So I had some jerks in there. The jerks crawled up, pinched the snakes. I said, no more jerks. I wish I had a Fredonia, I'd feed you off. And I was kind of at a loss of what to do. So then I threw in one of the Subtaeniata, one of the Mekong mud snakes, because they immediately hide for shelter. Well, what happens? The fish can no longer hide under there. Now the Mekong has an easier access to prey because they're wanting to hide from the vine snakes, and the vine snakes have easier access to prey because they're avoiding the meeks, as we call them. We got a lot of dumb nicknames. So this is an option of an actual very effective cohabitation that was mutually beneficial to both species, which is always kind of fun. Also, these two animals occur in the same native range, and I've seen them about 4 feet from each other. So this is kind of like a time capsule memory of the way that you would see them in Java, Indonesia. Except the tree would be taller, obviously, because that'd be weird. And those are the vine snakes I was talking about. So kind of a sidetrack, but also, if it eats fish, I might as well play with it. Okay, so those are the easy ones. That's your starting course. Now training wheels off. Now let's get to the hard ones. The ones everyone wants. This is Coco. Some of you, in fact, I think a lot of you, have probably seen her online. She is, to my knowledge, the only T-negative albino. Well, she is the only T-negative albino elephant trunk snake in the country, and possibly the only. Yeah, that's Coco. Okay. So this is a tentacled snake. That's probably a snake I get people asking me about third most. It's first marine fowl snakes, then elephant trunk snakes, and these guys. They are cool. These are the snakes that inspired me to get into aquatic snakes when I was a little kid. I went to the San Diego Zoo. They had a display there of these, and I was just enamored. I was like, what is that? I've never heard of this. This is the weirdest thing. It lives in water. Someday. And since I'm fiscally irresponsible, someday came like 10 years later. But these are tentacled snakes. Obviously, I don't think I need to explain the name. They've got the tentacle, which is a sensory organ. They can feel when a fish swims by and nail it. And you've never seen a snake eat quite as fast as this. The fish just disappears. The tentacle snake photo. They come in two forms, striped and mossy. For a long time, people were going, oh, I think the mossy and stripes are two species, and kind of just throwing that out there. They're not. I've gotten mossies out of stripes and stripes out of mossy. It's probably a simple recessive trait. And there you go. Same mother, two patterns. So you get that a lot. You get people going, oh, the mossy species. It's just a pattern class. Fun thing about them, though, they eat guppies and mosquito fish and small mollies. So you know what else you can put in there? Shrimp. And the shrimp actually are pretty good at just going around picking at them, which you have to wonder if that detritus removal plays somewhat as an antifungal agent, because it's removing stuff from the skin all the time. So I do keep ornamental shrimp in with my tentacled snakes because why not? Exactly. Like, it cleans, it's aesthetically pleasing, it's fun. I have shrimp. If I ever get really hungry.
Really?
Okay, and this is what courtship looks like. You can see kind of their variants. So that one's really green. Females a little, much larger females. And they'll basically just chase each other around the tank. The weird thing about tentacled snakes is even though in nature they kind of have a set breeding cycle, in captivity, they just do what they want and randomly breed and randomly drop babies. And I know another keeper that said, hey, I just found out that I have 14 tentacled snakes, not 7. Do you want some? And it's because they just didn't even notice that the babies were being born in there and continuing, and because they just kind of, I have not figured out what their cycle or trigger or anything is. It's like put tentacled snakes in a tank together, successfully keep them, and eventually you'll have more tentacled snakes. Some of the snakes, tannin dumping and adjusting certain parameters helps. I do have a slight cooling in the winter, but it's very, very slight considering the place these animals are from does not have much of winter at all. Okay, this is one tentacled snake tank, and the one thing about tentacled snakes, who loves Where's Waldo? Good news! This is the Where's Waldo of pets, because there's 4 snakes in that photo, but you just sit there and go, wow, why did I do this? This tank is sump plumbed, you can see. Now with tentacled snakes, you don't need the surface area. They really don't use it. I have experimented with adding a heat light recently to a tank to see if they'll utilize that. Does not seem they do either, but I'm going to keep running it. Usually any of these experiments of just let's see what happens, I'll run for about a year and see if there's any benefit, or if it was just a waste of time and probably a fire hazard. Yeah, aquatic snakes, that's a fire hazard right there. But yeah, so basic fish tank setup. It's a little lower than you normally have a fish tank, which is one problem I have found. Because if you have a spillover, which is what this has, kind of a hangover return, if you push it as far as you can on that little plastic screw, it starts losing suction. So I've actually developed new PVC overflows, which this one hasn't switched to, which can lower the water level to whatever you want. You just loosen it and you can bring it up or down. And it's going to allow me to do water height fluctuations, because I'd like to see what water levels affect them, because there is a dry and a wet season. Maybe shallower and deeper water is a part of a natural cycle that for some snakes might trigger more controlled breeding rather than just random throughout the year breeding. And I don't have that on here, but eventually I'll share something on a group or something you guys can see there. Okay, so more tentacle snake photos. That's a baby, adults. This tank has a lot of duckweed in it. And you also notice the substrate, oak leaves. Fun thing, if you add oak leaves to a tentacled snake tank, they will reverse their classic arch. So this is the seahorse of the snake world. They'll wrap their tail around something and just kind of arch like that and wait for a fish to swim by. And as it does, then pop, nail it. However, if you have oak leaves at the bottom, and then you use sinking pellets, the fish will swarm that, and the snakes will reverse arc. They'll anchor from the top and hook down and start feeding off the bottom. And I've also seen them crawl down and just ambush like a rattlesnake waiting for prey, and just whack like a normal snake. So it's interesting that the variance in habitat causes varied hunting strategies, and this is probably something they do in nature. So I like having a leaf litter floor on them. It also helps with that pH buffer and that natural tannic tint. You'll notice all of my water is a little yellow. And it's not because I put lemonade in my water or tea, which is what they used to do. Not the lemonade, I don't think anyone did that. But people used to put decaf tea in aquariums. I prefer Catawba. It's actually got studies on it that say, yes, it has strong antifungal properties. Oak leaf also has some antifungal properties, and sycamore is another popular one. There's a lot of different botanicals, and you can go down a rabbit hole. I suggest tanningbotanicals.com, but Indian almond's my go-to. And you can buy that on eBay in like a huge quantity. And my RODI bucket's just full of a mantis tank, like, the mantis screen cages, and Catawba leaves. And I just brew a giant vat of tea, and when I need to refill, I add the tinted water, because none of these animals come from clear water situations. And just like fish, some fish that come from tinted water stress out in clear water. And the reason for that is to prevent this. Now, this is a rare occurrence. This is Ophidiomyces, or SFD, on a tentacled snake. They can get SFD, they're less prone to it. I assume this person also had elephant trunk snakes and a few others before it came to me. They probably accidentally cross-contaminated. It's not hard to do. It's forgetting a fishnet in one room. It's getting a drop of water in your hand and touching it. It's spore spread. It's super virulent, and it's easy to spread. And unfortunately, tentacled snakes do not survive well with SFD. Elephant trunk snakes can kind of have a few rebounds of it and get through as long as they don't get a secondary bacterial infection, but tentacled snakes, that's usually a lost cause, unfortunately. And you'll see it gets onto the face, and unfortunately, this animal actually survived. So this was a success story. We did the nebulized terbinafine, and it lost a tentacle. Its name is now Uno. But it survived and has followed animals. So, okay. This is a personal favorite, and one that's really not in the trade very much, but I'm working to change that just for fun. This is Bacourt's water snake. These things are beefy. The reason this is an intermediate is not because care is difficult. In fact, care is pretty easy, but they're huge. So when you talk about a bigger snake, you're talking a bigger feed, a bigger enclosure, and a lot more work. So these are almost a beginner, except you better know where you're going to get fish about that big all the time. I recommend making friends with a local fish store, and also regulations change state to state. In California, Mozambique tilapia are legal. I was just told today that Mozambique tilapia are not allowed here. So find out what fish you are allowed that are reasonably cheap to buy as fry. Convicts are another great one, and then you could keep these. But you might actually have to end up breeding your own feed to keep these currently, unless you live in an area with big fish readily available. I have been trying to wean them over to frozen thaw, and so far they're a little shy, which is often the case with aquatic snakes. They're nocturnal, they're shy, the lights go on, they freak out. Home lobsters, no problem. You can hand feed them. Rice patties, no problem. But so far these guys are a little shy. I'm trying to see if there's a way to transition them over to make the care a little easier. That's, by the way, their natural habitat in Tonle Sap, and that is the reason I went to Tonle Sap, which is a big lake in Cambodia. Okay, this was another example in Vietnam. You can just see the sheen. Also a slightly different looking animal, which was interesting. I didn't know there was so much locality variance. But a really large, girthy animal, pretty thick. And in both instances, I found them was really shallow water. Okay, and they come in albino. And this snake has two names. It's Alien Baby / Taffy, depending if I'm talking about her or my wife is. I actually, neither of those are my names. People just name my snakes. Like literally there's one named Paper Towel. I'm like, what? Whatever. Yeah, I'll admit, I'm usually not much of a namer, but I get overruled on that one. And there you go. You can see why I got the alien baby name. I get it with the eyes. They are cute, but they're also really dumb feeders. See what I mean by that in a second. Okay, so this is the enclosure for this. Basically 40 half fill with a little island. I've recently raised the water level just to the top of the island to see if it actually will use the land, because I found them in shallows. And other than that, when I introduced her to her tank, she's never been back up there. But yeah, shallow tank, well planted, lots of hides. And as I was talking about the bad feeding and the feeding pellet trick, I recently shared that on Facebook. But if you want to make sure your aquatic snakes are feeding, feed your fish in the exact same spot every day with a sinking pellet. The fish will learn that. If it's the same time every day, like for me, 6 o'clock, after the lights are off, you drop that in and they swarm. They don't care if it's day or night. They've been waiting for that, and the snakes learn that. So you'll see the snake just kind of waiting right there, and they'll feed right in front of you. Otherwise, you have to walk in at the right time because you're not scheduling feedings like you would a mouse or rat eater, which is a little problem you want to think about. You know if your snakes are eating, you fed them. Either the mouse is gone or the mouse is not gone. With aquatic snakes, you got 20 fish in there, you're trying to count fish, make sure they're actually disappearing for the right reasons, maybe especially the larger snakes where they're cichlids and the dead fish will probably get eaten before you see it. Having a feeding station where you can monitor that is really helpful. That allows you to know, okay, it's eating, or what's going on here, why aren't you eating? And that's really abbreviated. It went on like that for quite some time before it was yeah, very, very dirty. Okay, and like I was saying, that's in kgs, that's an adult. This is why this goes under my intermediate list, because that's a big snake. And this is a Homolopsidae. One thing different about the Homolopsidae and the Aquacordidae is aquacords don't poop. I expected more reaction than that. They have minimal solid waste. They have the most intertwined digestive system, the most thorough digestion. They don't feed that much, and they really don't make much waste. So, not that much poop. Homolopsidae, they're a little more like Nerodia. You pick them up, and they're going to smear you, and you won't forget for 3 or 4 days that happened, because you can smell it still. So this is a big poopy snake. I actually haven't dealt with adults in captivity yet, but in the wild, I've not had adults try to bite me. However, my Vietnamese herping friends said they bite a lot, so I guess I've just been lucky, or maybe it's just I'm picking up them excited and calm, not afraid, which very often is the difference. If you've seen them aggressive, you pick them up, you have those kind of movements where the snake's like, something's wrong here, whereas I'm just like, I traveled halfway across the world for this. The snake's like, I don't know what's wrong with him, but I'm not going to bite him, something's wrong with him. Terrible detour, but anyways, the point is they get huge, and they're poopy. So if you don't like poop, elephant trunk snakes. If you do like poop, well, you know, there you go. Okay, and on to elephant trunk snakes, everyone's favorite. Also known as wart snakes, but no one uses that name anymore. In the file snake family, which is confusing. Common names are always confusing, because there was, African file snake, and this is also file snake. Aquacords are a very ancient group of animals. They actually predate all of our current aquatic snakes. They started in Pakistan, in now extinct Aquacordus demi, and of course they're popular. They're cute, but they're not easy. A lot of people like to say, oh, they're easy, everyone's overstating it. Yeah, okay, where's your captive bred babies? And to date, I'm not aware of any being captive bred. But there are some things you can do to make them keepable. So this is an animal that came in from Florida. By the way, this isn't known other than to you guys and a few people I've talked to, they are still in Florida. So in 1983, there was one found in a lake, and well, this one came from right by that same lake. And so this got sent to me. Unfortunately, I did have SFD pretty severely. That's, I don't know, I thought it was in there twice. And then feeding. Again, you're going to need lots of very large cichlids. That's one of the paradox albinos. You can see she's already got one in her throat and swallowing another one. Usually they're not really constrictors. They don't have any venom. They're just bully feeders. They just grab the fish and swallow it, and it gets to kick around in stomach acid till it no longer is kicking around. That slide has gone over really poorly at fish groups, and I've removed it since. But there are some really interesting things they do. They jaw clap before and after they feed. It's like instead of a snake yawn. And it's terrifying the first time you see it. You're like, are you sneezing? Are you dying? What did I do wrong? I lost sleep over that the first time.
Are you taking them water when they do that?
No.
No.
No, so they also don't take breaths very often, about once an hour. They've got the most vascularized lung. Their lungs don't look like lungs. It's just like mush. There's almost no oxygen storing capacity, direct oxygen absorption, and then cutaneous expiration. So they inhale, but they don't exhale. You don't see them blowing bubbles, and they could just sit at the bottom for a long time. Their resting metabolism is a beat every other minute. So this is an animal who specializes in doing absolutely nothing. If you think you're lazy, just look at elephant trunk snake. No, I'm winning. I'm doing it. So that's what SFD often presents at in these. This animal came in as stuck shed. I cannot tell you how many times I've heard, it's fine, it's got a little stuck shed. Just roll with me here for a second. This is an aquatic snake that lives
In the water.
in water. Now, typically, if the shed is stuck, it's not hydrated enough, which is not possible in this situation. It could not get more hydrated. The very few rare instances they have stuck shed, it's because fungus developed between the two skin layers and adhered it on. They don't get stuck shed normally. So anytime you hear stuck shed, just like, it lives in water. No, it's not. And this was a Phaedomyces. Unfortunately, you can't swab for it. So would typically swab and send that in, gets nothing. I went 3 years going, what is this pathogen? I hit up Harvey Lillywhite, who Dr. Lillywhite wrote the paper on granulata scare back in the 90s. He hadn't bred them, and he didn't know what white spot, everyone calls it white spot was. Well, it turns out if you biopsy it, because it's exposed to water, the bacteria is killing kind of the surface exposure that we get. But if you biopsy, it is, in fact, I think 27 biopsies now. I can pretty much say this is snake fungal is what they're always getting, and nothing else. And often like this, just a little white spot. Something you're like, oh, maybe you got a nick. It's not a nick. It's going to get real bad in a week. Oh, that one's out of order. That was the Pacort. I have no idea how that happened, but that's in Cambodia for another size comparison. Okay, so yeah, that's SFD. Now, prevention and treatment. These animals, I know a lot of people like to say, oh, they're fine RODI with the UV sterilizer. Yeah. They are, unless they stress. However, that situation does cause stress, and why not prophylactically offer them the tannins and the acidity that prevents fungal infections? A Phaedomyces as a pathogen does not reproduce as well under 6.5 pH. So as long as your pH is under 6.5, the chances of that pathogen in the water reproducing and affecting the snake become lower. Now, they're probably blood level colonized. However, they're still exposed to that low pH water, and having low pH water does seem a nice preventative measure. So do I think you 100% have to? No, you can try not. I just don't know anyone that's succeeded more than a year. With these animals, and unfortunately, as we mentioned earlier, the slow metabolism, it takes a long time for your mistakes to register. They don't tend to have fungal outbreaks until they shed. So say you've had this thing 6 months, 8 months, it sheds, and then all of a sudden it has, well, I was doing great, I don't have it yet, because that's pretty much when you have problems. You're not going to have problems with these until they shed, and that takes a really long time. And unfortunately, because they have a slow metabolism, all of your mistakes, you don't get to find out about them for a long time. And then when you do, it rapidly goes downhill. So those are kind of the things, having the proper conditions, proper temperature, proper pH. And I don't have time to give you care sheets on all of these, so if you have questions, follow up. But acidic water, dark water, shallow water, you don't see this very much. And I think shallow is a big part. A lot of people are keeping these in fish tanks. I've noticed if you don't have a huge clearance on the top, or a really, really tiny clearance, the snake will bump its nose when it comes for air, and it scares it. And being constantly scared every time you try to breathe is not a non-stressful environment. And since stress seems to be the trigger, I think having a little more airspace is helpful. Okay. Advanced keepers only, AKA probably shouldn't. This is where I'll just admit I'm a glutton for punishment. I don't know why. This is just the most masochistic keeping you can possibly imagine. But I think my fascination was these animals have come in, this is Aquatic granularis, since I was a kid, right? And I'm not getting any younger. But no one's ever bred them. No one's ever had long-term success. And I wanted to figure out what was going wrong, which is kind of where I started with these back in 2004. Now I'm breeding them every year, and I don't know what to do with babies. What has happened? Okay, oh, never mind. I apologize again. Okay, so first of our hard keepers. The animals I'm going to talk about right now are brackish. Has anyone ever kept a brackish aquarium? How much fun was that? Where you got one nut, and Yeah, okay, yeah, exactly. That's why these are dance keepers. Brackish is difficult. Brackish is that level between fresh and salt water. Brackish bacteria is fickle. So you add a little bit too much salt, and all of a sudden your bacteria crashes because now you're into the marine bacteria salts, and a little too little, it crashes again. Brackish tanks like to crash. Brackish is just not a stable environment, and it's difficult to keep regulated in an aquarium. You can, it's not easy. So that's problem number one. And again, these are animals that like stability. So having the instability of trying to recalibrate things, not fun. This right here is a Bacadam, Cerberus schneideri. This snake I've seen in the highest density in my entire life. At 386 snakes in about 2 hours, we lost count. And we kept seeing snakes at that rate for another 2 hours before I was like, okay, we're good now, right? It was in a sewage deposit in Jakarta, behind a crematorium. Really, probably the nastiest place I've ever herped. And I actually sent an Arizona field herper there. She asked me for a coordinate, and it's like, yeah, go check it out. She had at the hospital for 4 days from going in the water. I fortunately did not. I think I ate enough dirt as a kid, but she must have not eaten dirt. But yeah, real gnarly place. So obviously these aren't animals that needs perfect water chemistry, but there's something about them that is difficult to get right. To date, I don't think anyone's captive bred them. I have a group. They're going on 2 years. I've not seen any breeding activity, so figuring out if there's something with water salinity or some other seasonal adjustment that needs to be made. But I've got a friend at the University of Kansas that wants to do some studies with them ex situ. So my purpose for breeding them is to have a population for him to study. But unfortunately, I just have a small group that's just sitting there and being freeloaders, eating food and doing nothing else. And this is kind of how you see them in the natural habitat. This is an animal I really want to actually look into recreating this soil because they tend to take over crab burrows and prawn burrows and other burrows. And that's not the easiest situation to set up in an enclosure, but I imagine these holes are hypoxic. And guess what fungus doesn't breathe? Carbon dioxide. It breathes oxygen, meaning hypoxic water is a terrible environment for it. And I think for some of these mud snakes that live in burrows where there's no oxygen, that actually might be what they're getting in the wild that they're not getting in captivity. I think sometimes the movement of the water and the oxygenation that we do for the fish is actually working against us because fungus needs air. And this is my group. I'm not sure if there's any others of these in captivity. There were some rhinocops available, Cerberus rhinocops, about a year ago, and I missed that. And unfortunately, I hit up the person who got those, and they lasted about a month. So, and look, I'm not saying I have not had my fair share of struggles with this species. I start with a group of 10. So they're stable now, but I think we still have some more decoding to figure out what we're missing in nature. And that's what all of this comes down to. There's no care sheets. We've got to look at nature. We've got to look at the ecology papers written. We've got to read what science has and try to extrapolate. And sometimes it's reading the fish papers. Sometimes it's saying, what else lives in that habitat that I can try to take a tiny detail that we're missing because we're missing something. And it's obviously not water quality because there's like dead body parts and diapers in their natural habitat. And this is just another enclosure example. So again, kind of the same thing, a little area for them to haul out, and then sticks and very simple water setup on this one. So these guys actually had a whole sump in a whole big tank, and I was having so many issues, and I separated them out into 40s with sponge filters, and they did fine, but then the feeding went bad, so then I slammed them all in the same 40, and that's actually when I started having success. So again, this is where I'm starting to go. I think this low-tech simplified version for a lot of these species is actually way better than the tens and thousands of dollars I put into UV sterilizers, and like I went way too crazy at first with Fosband reactors and all this coral equipment that really didn't do anything. Okay, on to my personal favorite. I literally have a whole talk on just these. Luckily, you're not at that talk. This is Acrocordus granulatus in Komodo. This was my lifer. How am I doing on time? Do I have time for a quick story? Okay, cool. Yeah. So we just done the whole Komodo thing. We hadn't seen the blue viper yet, which was kind of one of the targets. Obviously, you see Komodo dragons in Komodo by default. They actually take over the bathrooms, and you have to find a new place to go to the bathroom. And I was talking to our ranger guy. If you want to herp Komodo, by the way, hit me up. There's a ranger who will take you out herping at night. And if you're just a tourist, it closes at 5 o'clock, and you can't herp it. So the only way to herp it is actually to know a ranger. And then they charge you a lot, but it's worth it. Well, I mean, it's Komodo. There's stuff you can only see there. So we done all the herping, and I was like, oh, awesome night. And Becca, a lot of you know her, my wife. She always hates when I have a target or obsess about it, because that means if I don't see the target on vacation, at the end of vacation as we're flying home, she goes, how was vacation? I'm like, it was fine. It's because of, no, it's not because of that, just would have been nice. So now I try not to tell her when I have a target, but for Komodo, oddly enough, this was my target because I'd missed it twice. I'm like, I know there's, and my friend had just seen one there a year prior. Now, my ranger friend goes, I've only seen 1 in 30 years, your chances are 0. I get to the docks, back to the boat, we're exhausted, and same spot we'd just seen a manta ray earlier in the day, so pure salt water, and you kind of think of these as more brackish, but they do go into the ocean up to 20 meters deep, so 60 feet. They tend to hang out in the shallows, and that was one of the notes I learned from the Solomon Islanders. Where they hang out during the year changes throughout the year, according to the people on Malaita. Which means there's probably some spatial ecology we're missing. They maybe go from the shallows to the fresh or the salt, depending on the season. Maybe, I believe what's probably happening is the gravid females go to the shallows when they're gravid. Because these snakes are negatively buoyant. That means they sink. It wouldn't make much sense to be a bully underwater semi-constrictor if you floated up when you did that. So the way they're able to wrap fish and stay down is they only stay down. They don't float. In fact, when they die, they stay down for a little bit until the gases build up in their body. So this is a sinking snake. Now add 8 little sinking babies to her. When she needs to get air, that's a struggle. And I saw that the first time I had a gravid female. In fact, the 2 times I still have problems with SFD in these animals is the males during breeding season, because they're literally just doing spaz laps. Like they smell it in the air and they gotta find the girl, even though it's right next to her. Or it'll be like right there. And they literally, they're not smart. I hate to say that, but these are probably, of all the herps I've dealt with, and yes, I've had bearded lizards, probably the dumbest. And I hate to say that, but in Malaita, they call them sleeping snakes because they will swim right into a tree trunk and back up and do it again like 3 times before they figure to turn. And you think, okay, they do that in takes too. Like at first I felt terrible. They'd like swim right into the glass and they could swim backwards and swim. I'm like, what are you doing? And then I saw in the wild, I'm like, oh no, you're just stupid. Okay, it's not me. But this is nice. They do have very poor vision. And you think, okay, well, they don't need the wild. Apparently they do, because they crash into everything. They should be called crashing snakes. But yeah, so this is Komodo. So anyways, I saw this thing in the docks, and it was just a banded snake moving. And my ranger friend goes, oh, it's a Cerberus. I'm like, that's not a Cerberus, which is the snake we just talked about. I'm like, that's for sure Aquatic. So I jump in the water, clothes and all, everything in my pockets, everything ruined. It's okay. And I start reaching, but of course, the second you jump in the water, it's just cloud. You can't see what you're reaching for. And it occurs to me that in this moment, I'm an idiot. Because I'm in Komodo. And you know what else is in Komodo? 8 different common species of sea snakes, which actually wrote the sea snake chapter in this book. So I should have thought about that before I just jumped in, but I was already committed. So as I'm doing this, going, this might be my last vacation. Finally get in my hand, and these things feel like wet socks. So once they hit my hand, I was just like, yes, and really overreacted with excitement to the fact the ranger thought, like, what's wrong with him? So, not only is this my lifer, not only is this what I want to find, but I'm not dead. And he goes, yeah, I was kind of thinking the same thing, because my next guest was going to be a crate. I'm like, yeah, me too. So you can take my advice for keeping, probably not the field herping advice. This is just another habitat pick. Because they live in variable habitat, I really like this one. I feel like this is something you could really easily recreate. They can be kept salt or brackish, but just this right here, I'm like, yeah, I could totally do that. You see a pajama cardinal, which is a great readily available fish. So this is inspirational. A lot of this is just like, if you want to keep these, this would be a really cool enclosure to recreate.
Mangrove?
Yeah. And then this is a female Solomon Island granulotus. Like I said, I'm suspicious there's something going on here. It is a very old species, but they've been separated by a sea trench, and like I said, they're negatively buoyant with a depth limit of 60 feet. Meaning, if there's a sea trench, benthic division might be a genetic barrier for them, which has not been established in snakes yet. So it's become a much larger project than I intended to be, but I've been working on that for a few years, because I do believe that the Solomon Islands might not be related, and here's why. I kept Solomon Islands in with Indonesians. These things breed like rabbits the right time of year, and I've never seen copulation between the localities. And I didn't want it, I just happened to have 2 Indonesians. I'm like, oh, I'll move them over into here. And then I was like, okay, gotta send some more Indonesians. Usually what happens is an import comes in, they're sick, they're like, hey, can you just take these and save them? And whatever I can save, then I have, and give away or keep. And in this situation, I had 2 different locales. And I was like, okay, this is weird. So I started mixing up the sex ratios. Going, okay, you only have a male of this locale. And several years, couldn't get them to cross. And at this point, I didn't want them to cross, but I wanted to see if they would. That's when we actually took some specimens, and the reproductive organs are the same. So they probably can't, which is a good indicator this might not be the same thing. So the last slide you saw was the banded, the Indonesians. There are a lot of locality variants, and my granulotus talk has all the different localities. But in the Solomon Islands, they're dimorphic. So the females are black, and the males are banded. Across all localities, there's less contrast on the females, but the Solomon Islands is the best example of that. And this is in its natural habitat on Malta. And this is kind of what I'm talking about, where you can see kind of a variance in localities. So these are both Indonesian animals, but the female's still striped. I'd still consider that dimorphic. I'd say that's pretty dimorphic. And you can't really probe them, so generally just looking at them when they're adults is fine. Here's another thing unpublished, probably because not that many babies have been seen. They go through an ongenetic change. They're all born super black and white, and with time they fade into these two different patterns, whether they're male and female. So it's difficult to tell the sexes when they're young. There's also some physical characteristic differences that are kind of hard to tell on this slide, but the females, not only being girthier and larger, have more robust heads. They're ambush predators. The males are not ambush predators. They swim around and chase fish. So they have longer, narrow heads and actually prey on different fish sizes and types. So across all aquacords, the male and female actually have different predation techniques and different prey preferences, which is interesting because that probably allows them to have super heavy densities. As this animal in like Lake Taal, the density is insane. The density in Malita is insane. Where you find them, you find lots of them. So it makes sense the females will prey on something different than the male to allow to have that big of a population.
What is their natural lifespan?
Unknown. So funny thing, on Granulatus they thought it was 8 years. That seems almost impossible with the population densities, and they're not entirely sure on that. The record in captivity when I started keeping them was 6 months, and then it went up to 3 years and 4 years, and now I've got 11 is my top, and I don't know if anyone has them longer. So I think the current captive record is 11 years, but that's just because we're in the infancy of understanding these animals in captivity. This is on Malita, and I just shared this slide because I thought it was fun. I went there the first time, and I was supposed to be scouting for a TV show. Instead, I did a lot of herping at night. Because you can't scout at night. And these kids were terrified of snakes. They're like, don't touch the sleeping snakes, don't touch the sleeping snakes. The necklace I'm wearing is actually their currency, so he's wearing a 20 and that's a 5. They exchange shells or puka shell necklaces for money. They call it Shell Monkey, and they gave me that one because it's based off a sea crate, and they knew I liked them. Yes, that kid has a cigarette. It's the Solomon Islands, okay? They don't even have TV. It's a different world. Friendliest people. So I told them I'd come back. I didn't expect them to really put much thought into that. 2 months later, I come back and they're, oh, it's Mr. Mike, hang on, I gotta show you where this is. And they're literally taking me to places where and like that's how I found the Candoya. It's like, this garden area, there's a boa that hangs out here. And like, because they knew I wanted to find snakes, they like target all the spots. And that strip back herping was really easy because I had this army of kids pointing. They also asked me like 96 times if I was military, because that's their only experience with outsiders in the military. The military used to be their school, or the US military provided their school/hospital until the pandemic. Pulled out, so they saw me there, they're like, oh, you're military? Mike, no, I'm TV. You don't have that, but that's... There's like a few TVs in the Capitol Island, but other than that, that's it. And oddly enough, they're just watching, what's the brooming sport? Every time I was in there.
Curling?
Curling, yeah. They just had curling from the Olympics from like 8 years ago on TV. No idea why, and I didn't want to be like, hey, why is this all that's on TV? But I saw that, and then like this 80s movie where they're like, some gangster steal a baby, and that seems to be on Limbo there too. So. Okay, so I showed you the black ones. They also come in beautiful blue. Now, this is a Philippines locale that seems to be specifically coming from saltwater localities, and these do seem to do better in saltwater. You might be going, Philippines? Well, yeah, if you know your import laws, you can't import Philippine reptiles, except the marine ones they treat like fish. So these do occasionally come into fish vendors because they fall under a different classification. Why? I don't know. But occasionally, very, very rarely, you will see Filipino blue Aquacortus granulatus coming in with fish supplies. Again, I don't know how it works, but they do trickle. But in my opinion, probably one of the most beautiful snakes that you almost never see. Now, if you're going to keep these, they're going to eat a lot of mollies. And when I mean a lot of mollies, I catch about 1,000 every 2 months, so I'm going through about 6,000 mollies a year. And that's for 2 colonies. And what's the wholesale right now? But that's like, what, 25, $50 if you can get wholesale?
Roughly.
Yeah.
A little bit more than that.
Yeah, a little more than that. Yeah, it keeps going up.
Because we sell for $6. So
yeah, exactly.
Probably 2
So
1/4.
$6 times 6,000. Yep. Can I interest you in a granulatus? Probably not. This is why one of my side quests is to commercialize mollies, and I've actually got a farm in California breeding them right now where we can get them down to about 12 for $1 on the pet store side, and we're trying to bring it down even further so that there's no reason not to buy these instead of goldfish. Because goldfish, if you take away anything, goldfish are trash. They're good for one thing, fattening up an animal that's really, really skinny, and nothing else, or prawns. They have thymidase. Thymidase depletes B1. If you were eating nothing but goldfish, you know what happened? You'd end up as smart as an acrocorn. Because it causes nerve damage. And eventually, different species have different susceptibilities. Some pretty much seem impervious to it. In Homolopsis, the puffface, decreased fertility. You start throwing slugs. In other snakes, straight up death. In these guys, about 6 months they die. So that is one thing to be aware is you're gonna eat a lot of mollies. And like I said, they're not really killing the prey.
That's cool.
They're more or less just putting the fish inside itself and letting their digestive system do the killing.
Oh.
Yeah, and that goes on. Another slide that does not go over well with fish people. Aquashella. You want to see a crowd just frown?
How long does it take for it to?
For them to frown instantly. They were all frowning right away.
No, not the.
No time at all. I'm just going.
No, I mean to kill the fish.
I mean the wiggling stops. Eventually.
30 minutes.
I mean, not much to breathe in there.
30 minutes. Ow.
No, I've not sat there and you're just much more macabre than I am. I guess I could stop watching. Time of death. I actually don't know. I usually just go, oh wow, okay, I need that when I'm talking about how they pray, and I'll take a stopwatch to it next time. And then, if you're able to keep these guys successfully, this is the underwater ballad that is mating, and they do this really aggressive head shake. And they will do that for days on end. Like I said, here's the disadvantage. The males are exhausted, they don't feed during this time, and this is when you end up with fungal issues on them. The females tend to have fungal issues towards the end of their gestation, which is why now I move the females into a very shallow tannic tank separate from everything else to allow them to have that less stress environment to give birth. They're not feeding anyway. So they'll feed pretty much the entire time they're gravid until about the last month, and these things get viscerally gravid. Like you look at them and you're like, that is not comfortable. Are you gonna be able to survive this? Why aren't you bigger for this size of babies? Because the babies come out pretty good size for a snake that's no more than 2.5 feet. Yeah, and he just keeps head wiggling.
Are these poisonous?
No, they're totally harmless. Another fun fact, they have a really high scale count, and every one of these scales has a very sensitive nerve ending. So when fish bump them, they close like a rat trap. And you might have noticed in that last one how it kind of coiled. They're more of a touch predator. Like their whole body's just like the mouse trap trigger, and when something touches them, they wrap into it. Also means it's probably not a good snake to pet. And that's what the babies look like. Like I said, they go through a dramatic genetic change. Because when they're born, every last one of them is a little Beetlejuice snake.
It looks like a zebra eel.
Yeah. And I will say, if you ever wanted to see like, hey, let's see what people on Instagram are recording in terms of sea snakes, which I did for the book, because there's a lot of sea snakes without photos. I'm like, maybe I'll get lucky. Maybe someone saw something they didn't know. Yeah, you follow hashtag sea snake or hashtag anything aquatic snake, and you're going to be looking at mostly eels. So I now have a kind hashtag of not a snake, it's an eel, and I put that up there. I should probably stop. But that's what the babies look like. Or that.
Oh, Lord.
So that was last year. And this is a generation that is now being raised partially freshwater. Here's what I'm doing. I'm replicating what the fish people did. They are out now, like basically I could probably move them to fresh. I've been gradually decreasing the water. They were born in a hypoxic tank on purpose. So this is kind of what this like little running trial is. I take the female and I put them in the hypoxic stink tank, the tank with this super brute tannins, no oxygen added, the tank that actually kills most fungal pathogens. I let them give birth in there. Here's why. That tank kills fungal pathogens. You can literally put the snake in that situation. You have two options for snake fungal disease, terbinafine or stink tank. Put them in the stink tank, I figured, hey, maybe won't have as much fungal issues with the babies if they're born in this environment. So far, knock on wood, none, zero, no problems with the salt gradually decreasing. These are now moving into a new enclosure, and the F2 generation is going to be raised full freshwater, and my hope is by F3 we have a more stable freshwater compatible snake that's less prone to SFD, if not colonized with it.
How many is that, and is that one litter from one female?
No, that is 3 females and 16. Yeah, no, so this was like literally they all gave birth the same night. I'm like, oh, crap. And you notice the last slide, they're like brilliant white, and these ones are kind of, it's actually just because that water was so tannic, it stained them right away. But basically, one of the things I'm working with in this species is to breed them away from the salt mead. It's worked in fish, it's worked in some other animals, and so far it's working in them because the end goal would be that'd be a much easier snake to keep and work with and breed. And I've actually got a major zoo that wants to put them on display and wants me to build the display, but I'm a little afraid of doing a brackish animal that's to have salt acclimated mollies that might not succeed for them. So I told them my goal is to kind of develop this into a freshwater species in captivity and then go from there. And then maybe they can move up the list a little bit and not be at the impossible don't keep. As I mentioned earlier, you can keep them in a saltwater enclosure. This is a Philippine animal in what we call a fallow tank, or fish only with live rock. Kind of a simple salt setup. Here's the problem why I don't like doing this. A, Vanessa, damsels, they used to be $3. Actually, do you have it? You don't.
No.
Okay, so I'm gonna just keep picking on you. We just met. I think damsels were like $3 when I had a salt tank like 5 years ago, and now they're like 20, 30 bucks.
Yes, depending on the species.
So you could acclimate mollies to a saltwater tank,
Yep.
or damsels, but they're gonna be eating like 20 a week.
It's a $10 damsel.
Problem number one with keeping them in saltwater, they're expensive to feed. Problem number two, they need to drink water. Fresh water. They can't drink salt water. So you have to offer them fresh water, which you can do in brackish setups when you do the water changes, turn off all the pumps and refill your RODI, and it creates a lens, and they'll drink off the lens. Alternatively, you can do floating water bowls. Here's the problem. Remember what I said earlier? They're not that bright? A handful will figure that out, and a handful will never find the water. Alternatively, you can keep a little freshwater tank where you put them down in the freshwater tank to get a drink like once a month. But in the end, the biggest problem with keeping them saltwater, they're hard to give water to. Interacting with them, physically handling them, stresses them out, and I personally do not think this is the best way to keep them. Is it possible? Yeah, have people. 8 months, 9 months, I don't know any really long term.
You'd have to create a saltwater, brackish, freshwater combo.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
don't have to worry about them jumping out.
Which if we can just get them to live in fresh water, then let's just skip
Yeah,
that.
that'd be a lot easier.
Yeah. So this is the brackish setup. Just give you an enclosure idea. And that's a 150 with a sump. And this is a more recent version. I actually don't like that fake stuff. I just had a lot of it. And where I've seen them, well, this is basically inspired by Malaita, because all the coral's dead there. Unfortunately, they sold all the lumber on the island to a Chinese logging company recently, and they just dumped the pollutants in the water. So the sharks are gone, the coral's gone, it's pretty much just death and wood. So I said, you know what, these are Solomon Island file snakes, I'm gonna make the death and wood tank. I also did some water tests, 64 different elements. The only thing that was high was silicates, which is a little interesting. Could be from the pollution from the logging, I don't know. But otherwise, the elements test came out pretty reasonable, and the water was tinted kind of more yellow, so I used a mix of sycamore and catappa in here. Do you need to do that? No, I'm just that level of nerdy where I want the water to be the right color, and apparently this was like, kind of looks like slightly dehydrated, yeah. So the salinity I vary because I really hate just easy care, but no, there's actually a reason to that. So I let it get up to kind of mid-range brackish, 0.021, and then when I do a water change, I do a pretty decent sized water change on the tank infrequently, and I top it off with RODI, and I leave the pump off for about an hour, and let them just get any water off that lens that I can, and then I have to slowly re-add the salt because now my water values are off. It's a pain in the butt. This tank has a sump that's, it's 100, this used to be a saltwater tank. I think it's 185 gallons, and the sump is the entire bottom of it. That helps the stability, but I'd say it's this is the system I most often am having to test, keep an eye on. But there is one thing in this tank that the other one doesn't have, and that, see this foam area right here? That's a 10-gallon aquarium, or 20. That's a 20. That's a 20 on a stand covered in foam, filled with leaves and fresh water. And you know what I found? When the females or the males, well, more the females, but especially both of them, but more the females, when they need to go to shed, they go in here. It's just peat, water, leaves, and mud. When the females are gravid, they go in there. Remember I was talking about earlier, I think there's some spatial ecology thing where they probably go into the freshwater shallows. They might do it for shedding too, because they're vulnerable. They don't want to be swimming, they don't want to be seen, they don't want to be active. So I gave them the option of having a mud bath in their tank, and they utilize it. So I like that. Only problem with this particular setup, this festering water is really hard to change. So I wouldn't do it this exact way again, but again, I wanted to see, will they utilize having that mud bath readily available to them? The answer was yes. And there's another brackish enclosure, just kind of get an idea of their size to the tank size. And you really need about this many fish in there at all times. And I should go back that the Homolopsis, if you put just the right size fish in there, they'll generally eat because they generally eat. But the elephant trunk snakes and the tentacled snakes and the marine fowl snakes need a lot of fish to eat at all. In fact, when you get down to a few fish, they just give up. They're like, yeah, no, I'll wait for a big supply to come. Now, is that because in nature, when there's not a lot of fish available, they don't want to wipe out a small pond? Is it they just know they're bad feeders and they need the chaos? Who knows? But I have found with marine fowl snakes and elephant trunk snakes, when you only have a few fish in there, you might get no feeding at all. Whereas if you have a lot of fish, then all of a sudden you get a lot of feeding. You can also sometimes coax feeding by bringing all the fish out, like just let it get really, really low and kind of give a period without fish and then dump a whole bunch of fish and then go on a feeding spree. Kind of like, oh cool, it's time to eat. All right. And finally, the problem with these guys, just so people can kind of get an idea for what you're looking for the pathogen. So you guys can kind of see as these dots go down, the areas I'm highlighting, these are all fungal sores. And yeah, it's all Phaeomyces. These animals were treated and are still in my collection, but that one's not. Yeah, this one, sorry. I should probably just have a slide with the circles and not have like all the animation, but it's kind of fun.
It's kind of fun. And you do a lot of work on that.
Yeah, a lot of circling. So this animal came to me in this condition, and unfortunately, when you get an animal like this, I would say just at this point, it's kind of a lost cause. Not only has it completely removed the scales right here, and again, those are sensory organs. Exposed flesh, meaning secondary bacteria. I think the number one thing I've seen kill aquacords in actual necropsies is salmonella. But it's just a variety of the gram-negative bacteria that's in the water. Usually ends up a spinal infection. You'll see them sometimes for sale with kinked tails. That's usually where that spinal infection starts. It just keeps kinking down the body. Having your bloodstream exposed to water is just a recipe for bacterial infection. Gram-negative bacterial infections kill far more than the SFD itself. But in this instance, the SFD probably would have done the job too, because once it gets in the eye cavity there, typically they're going to shed and that eye is going to come with it. And there's no, so unfortunately this one was entirely a lost cause.
So the king tail,
Sorry,
go ahead.
very good.
So that's an indication that it has a spinal
It
cord
can be. There's a
infection?
lot of things that can cause king tails, but in these guys, I've not seen it separate from that.
Okay.
So yeah, and I'm not sure what it is specifically about aquacords. It's not a lot. I'm working with Dr. Elliot Jacobson and a few other vets at University of Florida, and we don't have a lot of understanding of their veterinary needs. But what we are seeing is there are some gram-negative bacteria that tend to be what cause them. You'll get the spotting, it goes away. You're like, oh cool, I'm fine. And then like a couple weeks later, snake's dead at the bottom of the tank. And yeah, it's usually those secondary bacterial infections. Because the fungus they'll often shed off. You'll get it right before shed, they shed it off, they still have it. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean they don't still have it, it's in the blood. But usually you'll get through it that way. It's that open wound in the exposed water. So if you do get bad enough, you should talk to your vet, and prophylactically, I would suggest doing a general gram-negative antibiotic like Baytril, just to make sure you're killing anything that could be in the water, which is where having UV sterilizers is somewhat beneficial. It will cut down that negative bacterial load somewhat, but then there's a whole bunch of debate on that one. So I haven't found one way or another dramatically different results with or without them.
I don't like these airplanes.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like I've gone back and forth. I've had tanks with them. I've had tanks without them. I've had people that swear by them. But when I've done like literally 4 tanks of the same species, seeing the difference, I have not noticed notable improvement other than maybe it'll cut back secondary bacteria infections. But again, even there, I don't have data to back that. It's just what a lot of fish people do. So up to you.
Have you ever gut loaded the fish with antibiotic to feed the snakes?
So these guys would not feed off tongues. Occasionally, elephant trunk snakes do. So it's usually intravenous, IV or neuromuscular. That's the other thing. Is pulling them out to do oral feeds all the time would cause more stress, and this is a disease brought on by stress. So you need something minimal interaction. Things like Baytril, lower dosing schedule. You could do 2-3 shots and a lot of them just move on. Homolopsis maybe, rice paddock snakes probably, but these guys, I think pulling them in and out to try to get them to take a medication would probably kill them just as fast as leaving them alone. I don't really need those circles, do I? And with that, I'm still. Do we have time for questions or should I?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, good.
Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
Have you ever experimented with mangroves in any way for habitat or nitrate sinks?
Mangrove trees? Yeah, I did on the granulotis a few times, because obviously brackish tanks, that's one of the better nitrate extractors. I haven't noticed that they pulled enough to really make them worth it, which is why I went away from that. I had like 6 up top, and then you gotta remember these snakes can still escape. So I wrap sponge around the hole so that's snug. That's another thing, every one of these tanks, you have to make sure there's no spot of pencil can come out, because they're still snakes, they still escape. But no, I didn't have a whole lot of where I was noticing it was worth the extra effort to have the holes and adjusting all the time. I had played around with it, but I didn't see a significant change in the values. That's why I said things like sweet potatoes. Buy a sweet potato from the store, put some sticks in it, stick it in a cup of water, it'll start sprouting. Cut those vines off, those will grow like crazy. And as long as you're not letting it ever fully grow in and you're keeping it, hacking it back, it'll keep pulling nitrates out. And nitrates are why you do water changes. So you can get your water changes way back by having all these plants at the top. And that's really the reason I have the plants, is nitrates. Any other questions? All right.
What kind of oak leaves and sycamore leaves? Are you talking about just like native stuff?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, I do. So any leaves I put in there, I boil first. In a pressure cooker. Pretty effective boil. I put them in a pressure cooker. I dump out that first batch of water, and then they can go in the tank. That's also what I do. So for the tannin process, I'll get the catop leaves and get on eBay, a huge thing from Sri Lanka. Boil them in a pressure cooker, dump out the first one, and then I reboil that for hours until it becomes a concentrate. I have that on hand to redose tannins when I don't need to change the water. Additionally, my third bathroom is an RODI water making bathroom because there are only 2 of us. We don't need a third bathroom. So the shower is a 65-gallon drum and RODI, and then the leaves, and that's kind of always growing. So I have the clear water, the tannic water, the smaller tannin tints, and then the tannin concentrates. A lot of tannins. House smells like a park when you do that, by the way. Actually, awesome side effect. If you pressure cook those leaves and pop the thing off, your whole house smells like a beautiful park for like a day. So.
Very earthy.
Yeah. I like it. I buy it.
I've got a very simple question. How big do the elephant trunk snakes get?
So there's locality variance there. I don't know if you've seen the animals from Thailand, but they get like that, and there's rumors of 8-foot snakes. The real answer is about 2 meters, 6 feet on females, closer to 4 feet on males. But I've seen some images against tape measures and know some people are saying, yeah, no, these Thai animals are getting like that. So yeah, I mean, and coco's like grapefruit around. So they are very large animals. And by the way, I've never had a Javinicus or a granulotis ever bite me. Like even in the wild, picking them up, like they gave me this little money bag and I put the snakes in it and I'm like measuring them and then putting them back out. And I never had an elephant trunk bite until a recent male. Wow. It's like getting bit by a sloth. Their teeth are in there hard. You think they gotta grab catfish and things that are escaping. So when it hits, it feels like someone just like glued a nail to a hammer and hit it into your hand. Like it actually has like an impact. You're like, oh, not that much blood, not that many teeth, but it does have kind of a sloth-like bite. If anyone else has been bitten by a sloth, I don't know if that's one. No, that's not usually. It's unpleasant. I don't
It's not
suggest
as
it.
common.
Yeah, they're nasty bites. Any other questions? Not about sloths. That's all I know about sloths.
All right.
Awesome.
Thank you. Mike does have a few copies of his book available if you'd like to purchase one.
Yep, and all the proceeds go to the Aquatic Snake Grant, which is the first grant on aquatic snakes. So we've got a project in the Philippines ongoing right now that's funded by the book.
And we got plenty of snacks left of water if you're interested. Take some.